Welcome to sgglobal news. From the news of a conviction of a gender-confused man who vandalized a Catholic school to Hamas survivor recollection of ordeal faced in the hands of terrorists during captivity days, these are our stories. A 30-year-old suspect has been charged with multiple offenses after spray painting transgender symbols and defacing religious property near a Catholic school in Eastern, raising alarm among parents. Police say the acts are being investigated as a potential hate symbol crime under state law. The case comes amid rising ideologically motivated threats targeting schools nationwide, including incidents linked to LGBTQ-related extremism.
A 32-year-old individual has been charged with multiple offenses, including a hate crime-related count after spraying painting a transgender symbol near St. Peter and Paul Elementary School in Easton. The markings also appeared on nearby businesses, related spaces, traffic signs, and public structures, prompting a broader police investigation. Police identified the suspect as Sean Radskevich King and announced charges including malicious destruction of property, defacing religious property, and the use of a hate symbol. Authorities cited state law indicating that graffiti may be prosecuted as a hate symbol offense if it appears intended to intimidate or threaten. On September the 5th, parents at St. Peter and Paul became alarmed when the graffiti was discovered and Catholic religious symbols were found defaced. Concern was heightened due to a separate shooting targeting Catholic school children in Minneapolis the previous week. Police acted quickly on a complaint filed by school officials and arrested King, who previously attended the school. In recent months, authorities have reported an increase in cases involving threats of violence linked to ideological motives. In October, a trans-identifying teen pleaded guilty to felony conspiracy charges, planning a mass shooting at an Indiana high school.
Pope Leo XIV has approved new general and personal regulations for the Roman Curias to take effect on January 1st, 2026. The framework revises language use, hiring practices, financial transfers, and retirement norms in line with predicate evangelium. Vatican News reported that the changes aim to strengthen pastoral service, integrity, and accountability within Vatican institutions.
Pope Leo XIV approved the new general and personal regulations of the Roman Curia, which takes effect on January 1st, 2026, according to Vatican News. Officials introduced the new framework to align curial structures with predicate evangelium and implemented it on a 5-year ad experimentum basis. Vatican officials described the document as an effort to strengthen pastoral service and missionary focus. Among the most notable changes is a linguistic reform stating that curial institutions, as a general norm, draft minutes in Latin or another working language. Sources noted that officials viewed this shift as a practical step reflecting the multilingual nature of the Curia. The regulations also established strict limits on nepotism and required candidates to demonstrate virtue, prudence, and relevant experience. Vatican authorities stated that lay staff begin employment under a trial contract lasting 1 to 2 years. The new rules expanded economic transparency measures. Officials must submit declarations every 2 years confirming they do not hold assets in tax havens or own shares that contradict Catholic social teaching. Vatican News reported that authorities would treat any failure to comply as a serious disciplinary violation. The framework additionally set unified retirement ages and standardized work expectations, including a minimum 36-hour work week and updated maternity and leave provisions.
Pope Leo XIV told reporters aboard his return flight from Lebanon to Rome that he once considered retiring but ultimately surrendered to God as he reflected on his election, global conflicts, and peace efforts. Speaking about Lebanon, Ukrainian, and border regional tensions, he emphasized the Holy See's behind the scenes diplomacy aimed at urging all parties to lay down arms, Vatican News reported.
Pope Leo XIV addressed journalists on the flight from Beirut to Rome after concluding his apostolic journey to Lebanon, outlining how the Holy See engages in discreet diplomacy to encourage warring parties to cease hostilities, Vatican News reported. The Pope spoke after meetings with political and religious representatives across the Middle East. He said sustainable peace remained achievable, adding that conversations with regional leaders were already underway through diplomatic channels. He noted that the Church remained largely behind the scenes, consistently advancing appeals for dialogue and non-violence through confidential diplomatic networks. Responding to questions on his election, the Pope stated he had once contemplated retirement, but eventually surrendered to God's direction. He explained that his spirituality centers on letting the Lord lead him through even the most challenging assignments. Commenting on global tensions, including the war in Ukraine and hybrid hostilities involving NATO and Russia, the Pope emphasized the importance of Europe in negotiations. Analysts quoted by Vatican News remarked that he viewed Italy as a potential mediator capable of bridging geopolitical divides. He also referred to Lebanon's model of Muslim-Christian interfaith harmony, which, according to the Pope, offers lessons for Europe and North America in overcoming fear and promoting authentic dialogue. Observers noted that the Pope highlighted unity, friendship, and human connection as essential foundations for peace in a polarized world.
Talks between Vladimir Putin and U.S. negotiator in Moscow ended without any major progress, despite being described as constructive. Core disputes over occupied territories and Ukrainian security remain unresolved, and the Kremlin says now while a deal is possible for now, the United States is yet to issue a detailed response.
Kremlin officials have confirmed that high-level discussions between Russian President Vladimir Putin and U.S. negotiators in Moscow ended without any major diplomatic breakthrough. The 5-hour meeting was seen as part of efforts to explore a possible path towards a peace deal in Ukraine, but Russian officials emphasized that core disagreements remain unresolved. According to Kremlin advisor Yuri Ushakov, the talks were constructive and useful, with some ideas from the US-backed proposal deemed potentially acceptable. However, he stressed that no compromise was reached on the most contentious parts of the negotiations, particularly those relating to control of occupied territories and long-term security agreements for Ukraine. Moscow has repeatedly insisted that any agreements must reflect the current realities on the ground, including Russian authority over regions it has seized since the start of the conflict. Without movements on these fundamental issues, the Kremlin says there can be no final settlement. The United States has not yet issued a detailed public statement following the delegation's return from Moscow.
3 Israeli soldiers were wounded in 2 separate attacks in the West Bank, including a stabbing near the settlement of Atred and car ramming near Hebron. In both cases, the attackers were shot and killed by Israeli forces during or after assaults. Authorities identified the 18-year-old assailants in the stabbing as Mohammad Azmar from Beit Rima.
The Israeli Defense Force reported that 3 Israeli soldiers were wounded in 2 separate incidents in the West Bank. In one incident near the settlement of Atred, north of Ramallah, a Hamas terrorist stabbed a soldier before being shot dead. The attack came hours after a soldier was slightly hurt in a car ramming near the city of Hebron. The attacker was killed during a subsequent attempt to arrest him. Tuesday's stabbing occurred after troops were dispatched to question a suspicious individual seen near a threat. Soldiers then began inspecting him when he pulled out a knife and stabbed two of them before being shot and killed. The Megan David Adam Ambulance Service said medics treated two lightly hurt soldiers at the scene before taking them for further treatment. Palestinian Authority Health Ministry identified the assailant as Mohammed Asmar, aged 18, from the nearby village of Beit Rima.
The public execution caused where a 13-year-old was ordered to shoot a condemned man before nearly 80,000 spectators as triggered global contamination rights groups warn that the Taliban uses a child, the mass mobilization of crowds, and the framing of the killing as a retaliatory justice reflect a deeply alarming normalization of violence and collapsing human rights environment in Afghanistan.
A disturbing scene unfolded in eastern Afghanistan where nearly 80,000 people gathered in Coastal Stadium to watch a public execution, one carried out by a 13-year-old boy. According to reports from the MUTV, the Taliban surrounded the teenager, a relative of the victim alleged murderers, and asked whether he wished to pardon the convicted man, identified locally as Abdul Rahman, son of Zawad. When the boy refused, the official placed a gun in his hands and ordered him to pull the trigger. Moments later, he fired the fatal shots in front of the massive crowd. The Taliban had publicly encouraged residents to attend, issuing notices the day before. The Supreme Court had later released a statement identifying the executed man as Mangal, the son of Tala Khan, insisting he had received a retaliatory punishment after being found guilty of killing another man with a Kalashnikov rifle. The court says the case went through primary appeals and high courts and that the victim's family was given the option of amnesty but refused. The man was originally from Paktia province but has been living in Khost. The use of child in execution and the massive public turnout has sparked international shock and renewed the fear about the Taliban justice system and the normalization of violence in public life.
George Abrani, the former Oxford Union president-elect, has apologized to Charlie Kirk's family after celebrating the commentator's assassination online. He claimed he reacted impulsively and deleted the post once he realized the seriousness of the situation. A no-conference vote removed him from his role, reflecting widespread concern over his judgment. He has since said he received abusive messages in response to his remarks.
George Abrani, the former president-elect of Oxford Union, is now apologizing to Charlie Kirk's family. After previously celebrating the conservative commentator's assassination online, Kirk was shot dead on September 10 while speaking at Utah Valley University, triggering national shock and widespread political tension. Moments after the news broke, Abrani reportedly posted an abusive statement in WhatsApp group and shared a similar reaction on Instagram. The comment sparked immediate backlash inside the Oxford Union. In October, a two-thirds non-conference vote removed him from the president-elect role. In an interview with The Times, the 20-year-old PPE student said, "He reacted without knowing the full context. I saw a headline and reacted. I didn't understand how serious it was. Once I realized, I deleted everything and apologized." He went on to issue a direct apology to Kirk's family. "No one deserves to lose a husband, and no child deserves to grow up without a father. I'm very sorry." Abrani, who had previously debated Kirk at Oxford, said he has received abusive messages online. Meanwhile, reports stated that Abrani's resignation was considered effective on October 21st after he lost a no-conference motion he had initiated himself. The process, however, drew complaints over vote counting and use of proxy votes, further intensifying public debates as more critics continue to clash across social media.
Former hostage Sergio Hafren says he endured beatings, starvation, and forced religious pressure over 738 days in Hamas captivity. He described execution threats, live grenade intimidation, rodent-infested cells, and extreme hunger while captors remained well-fed conditions. Worsened after Israeli political statesman in his final weeks, Hamas commander Bayan Abunar admitted the group regretted the October 7th attacks, telling Hafren they would not have launched them had they foreseen the consequences.
Former hostage Sigef Galfin, evicted from Nova Music Festival on October 7th, is now revealing the full reality of 738 days he spent in Hamas captivity. He says the violence began instantly, terrorists beating him as they dragged him away blindfolded and bound. He whispered the Shema as military struck him again and again, and until he eventually went numb to the pain. Galfin told the New York Times the conditions became even worse after Israel National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir publicly pushed for harsher restrictions on Palestinian prisoners. Hostages reported that these statements directly led to the increased beating, intimidation, and psychological torture. He described Hamas fighters casually playing with live grenades near them and forcing captives into what they called the execution key. When hostages refused to choose 3 people to die, a terrorist drew lots. The execution never happened, but Galfin says the trauma of that moment never left him. Starvation and filth became routine. He and other 2 hostages shared a single-use toothbrush and were kept in rooms infested with rodents, and at times survived on quarter of tomato and rice. Meanwhile, he said their captors were always well-fed. In the final 10 weeks, Galfin was held alone under Hamas commander Bayan Abunar, who repeatedly pressured him to convert into Islam. During the law conversation, Abunar admitted that Hamas would never have carried out on October 7th if they had known the scale of destruction consequences that followed. Galfin said he survived each day by thinking of his family, and the moment he heard his mother's voice on the radio, he called it a notion of hope that kept him always alive.
That's all for today. Until we meet again, God bless and thank you.